morning, everybody. This is Tim Lewis at the University of Missouri, along with my colleague Barb Mitchell, and this is another in the series of webinars that we've designed for our school climate transformation grant recipients, as well as several of our other PBIS partners and colleagues. Unfortunately, all you'll see are slides and hear my voice, so if you didn't get a good night's sleep, you may be nodding off. However, we will give you an opportunity to ask us questions. So on your screen, you'll be able to see the slide and you'll see a box for questions. You'll notice there's one there already. We were doing a little practice this morning, so you can sort of disregard that. At any point during the broadcast, please type in questions. We will respond as soon as we can, and we'll try to give a little time at the end of the webinar to do some follow-up questions. So hopefully everybody is able to hear me and able to see the screen. If not, I believe there's a way to request for assistance, and we've got our tech folks behind the scenes, and we'll get to that as soon as they can. Just a little bit advanced organizer. We know that many of you, this is the first time getting grants. Some of you are veterans. And there's a little bit of confusion about what we're supposed to do, what we need to do, what we have to do. You know, as grantees, you implement based on your funded proposal. I know the project officers have been keeping very close tabs and contact with all of the recipients, which is great. So if there are questions about funds, if there are questions about your budget, they're to talk to. The other sort of caveat we always put out there as members of the OSEP PBIS TA Center, we offer guidance based on experience and so forth. We don't speak on behalf of Safe and Healthy Students or OSEP or any of the U.S. Department of Education. So I said if there are questions or issues about your work scope, your budgets, they're the folks to chat with. And then today, again, the other confusion part is, do we have to implement everything our technical assistant partner is telling us? We offer this information to help you be successful. It's up to you at the end of the day in terms of what you implement, what you don't implement. If you are not a frequent visitor to our website, you need to bookmark it and go there as often as possible. So pbis.org, we will have this webinar posted. Again, give our web folks a few days, but you'll have the slides. If you want to forward this on to some of your colleagues, we actually archive these webinars so they'll be able to watch and listen in. In addition, I'll post some examples that we're collecting, sample action plans and other sort of materials or tools that we talk about this morning, okay? All right, so today we know that the School Climate Transformation Grant folks who are in attendance today, you're focusing on either state and or district-wide capacity. However, this morning we're really going to focus in on the school level, and here's the reason why. Because all the things that you do at the state and or school level should be really focusing in on building and assisting school capacity. So we're going to talk about what we do and when we sit down with new teams at the school level. As I said, if you are an LEA or an SEA, hopefully what you're thinking about is, okay, we want to replicate this process and we want to make sure our school teams are doing highly effective action planning. So what we need to do then is build a parallel action plan to assist them in delivering and implementing that plan. And so from an LEA state perspective, it's all about what professional development we can offer to help them meet their goals, what technical assistance might they need on the ground, again, to implement their action plan, as well as assisting them to do, at minimum, kind of an annual evaluation to make sure they're working towards those goals, the goals continue to reflect the current data, as well as the outcomes and priorities. Now, as I said, we're going to primarily focus in on school team level tools, but there are, however, a couple tools that I would recommend for all of our SEAs and LEAs. The first is to take a look at that implementer's blueprint. that you can find on pbis.org. In there, there's a self-assessment. We use that with our district leadership teams. We use that with our state leadership teams, at least on an annual basis, just to touch base, where are priorities, where we're going, what directions, where do we need to focus our efforts, again, to make sure individual school buildings are successful. The other tool that we'd recommend to kind of assist in thinking about, are we set up to help those school teams implement their action plans, is the district capacity assessment. You can find information about that on sisip.org, as well as it's also available on pbisapps.org. So if you're using PBIS assessments, that's one of the tools that you can access electronically. Again, I would really encourage you to go to SCTG, the Scale Up site, and get more information about what that district capacity looks like. Okay, again, another prompt. I know some folks, it looks like they've been popped on as we've started, and it looks like most people have got things in order, able to see and hear. Use the question box as we go along this morning. So what is action planning? I've got sort of a definition that we use when we work with our school teams here in Missouri, and in essence, it's just a record of tasks that our team needs to finish to get to the outcomes that we identify as essential, as critical for our school. And we're going to talk about this morning excuse me, the tools we use and the process and kind of some of the planning that we go through with our school teams and how we kind of align those pieces. The other thing we know is that it's really important. You know, sometimes schools say, well, this is just one more thing we've got to do. But it's really important that we develop an annual action plan and make sure we periodically, what we try to do is at least quarterly, have that school team pull that out, take a look at it. Where are we in terms of implementation? Where are we in terms of succeeding and accomplishing? Can we, in other words, can we take some things off our list? And making sure that all the things we're doing are aligning with those priorities we set forth. Again, we're going to talk about how we come up with those priorities. Our really efficient school teams, in essence, have that action plan out almost every time they meet. In other words, that action plan guides their agenda. They continually have it there in front of them. They may not address every issue on that action plan straight away, but at least it's there in front of them. So they know these are the things we're working on. These are the things that we decided based on our school data. Again, great. Questions are popping up. My colleague Barb is typing. We'll kind of tag team the presentation this morning and so forth. All right, some critical pieces within action planning. The first are those goals and steps. Just like plans for students, we want to make sure they're observable and measurable. Not, well, let's make it get better, or people will be happier. What does that mean? How do we define that? We want to make sure we set up timelines. Now, if we don't meet them, we don't meet them. We revisit, we adjust, but we keep moving forward, as well as doing a little bit of analysis about, okay, why didn't we meet our timeline? What were the barriers? What resources it might involve? In other words, do we have those there? Can we access if we don't? Somebody indicate the slides are not showing. Hopefully our tech folks are on that. Communication, in other words, the team creates this action plan, and the team is responsible for implementing the action plan, but we want to make sure we involve all of our partners, all of our colleagues at that school level. Another critical essential piece, remember, you'll be able to get these slides, so hopefully you just sort of listen and jot in a few notes. Who's responsible? I can't tell you the number of times I've sat in meetings and people have come up with great ideas, and everybody leaves thinking the person sitting next to them is going to take care of that. And then, as I said from the outset, how are we going to measure this? Right? We want to make sure we're documenting progress. We're not making progress, we problem solve and figure out where we need to go. Now, all of you who have been involved in school-wide PBS are hopefully very, very familiar with this figure. And we created this figure well over 20 years ago now. And it has, in essence, gone through a few tweaks, but for the most part, it's stayed the same. And this figure really represents what school-wide PBS is all about. It's not a package, it's not a program, it's not a curriculum. I really liken it to a problem-solving framework. And we apply this problem-solving framework when we work with our school teams to their action planning. In other words, we always start with data. We don't just simply sit down, okay, what do we need to work on? The first step is to take a look at our data. What should we be working on? What's in place that we want to strengthen? What are the gaps? And so forth. The data then guide what practices we adopt, as well as the data also help us when we adopt a practice figure out how we're going to progress monitor. And then that third piece, the most essential piece, what systems do we need to put in place? And in essence, systems are all about adult behavior. So our action plan says we're going to develop a matrix. We're at the universal level, and we're going to develop a series of social skill lessons. And the team has assigned the task to 2 of our colleagues to take lead on that. How do we engage everybody in that? What are the next steps to share the drafts? How do we get feedback from those folks? And so this data practice systems problem-solving framework is really at the heart and soul of what we do when we action plan. Again, a couple of you are still questioning about the slides. Hopefully, again, our tech guy in the background's working or can answer that question and let you know what you need to do. Now, we've worked with schools, as I said, for well over 2 decades now, and we've always used this problem-solving framework. At the same time, I think there's some things to kind of keep in mind as leaders in this process. And so what I've done is kind of I walk through my school teams or my district teams or even state teams through these sort of 4 steps in thinking about taking the problem-solving logic and building an action plan. So we start with some ground rules. We always start with data. We match the practices to data and then align our resources. So again, data, practice, systems. It's a familiar theme that you'll hear throughout all the things we do in school-wide PBS or PBIS or whatever acronym you're using.
Tim?
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but the slides are not changing, and I was wondering whether I could take a couple of steps to try and fix that.
How's that?
That looks perfect.
Okay.
Okay, let's pick up again, and hopefully everything will work the way it's supposed to. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Sorry again for that glitch, but as I said, if you've ever sat in on a webinar, you are familiar with this, right? Okay, so here are the 4 steps that I sort of described, a little bit more detail on each of those. What do I mean by established ground rules? Here are some things that I tell all my teams when they're sitting down, looking at data, action planning, prioritizing, and so forth. First thing we start off with is, look, there's nothing sacred, but everything's important. What does that mean? Yes, everybody at that table is going to have a view or opinion on what priority should be, and those are important, but if we're going to be effective as a school and truly develop an action plan that are going to lead to good outcomes for kids and make adults' jobs easier, we also have to go at it with, look, nothing's sacred. In other words, everybody's got to give a little bit. I also really stress it's not about philosophy or theory. If we have a debate at theoretical level or philosophical level, there's no movement. You can't convince me I'm wrong. I can't convince you you're right. What I tell my schools when they action plan is focus on the outcomes. We want to improve student achievement. We want to reduce the number of suspensions that we have in place in our school. We want to improve that overall school climate so that kids feel safer. The other thing I tell them, because people sometimes get defensive when they look at data, and they think it's, oh, you're just picking on us, you're just criticizing, and I point out, look, if what we were doing was working, we wouldn't be at this table. And as I said, I'm going to walk you through some tools and strategies we use to get there. And then you've always got to allow for that transition. I mean, this is a long-term process. We can put some things in our action plan. We can change the hallways or the cafeteria and get some pretty quick outcomes. But to truly implement a well-thought-out action plan that addresses all aspects and builds an entire continuum, that takes time. As I said, start with data. We always got to be prepared for the examination explanation. In other words, did you break this out by free reduced lunch? Did you break this out by left-handed redhead students? People will always want to come up with another explanation about why the data that look the way they do. And I always point out, look, it's just simply a sample of what's going on in our school. They're not telling the whole picture, you betcha. There's all sorts of other factors, no doubt about it. But at this point, this is what our school looks like. They always have to be contextualized, meaning, is this number good, bad? Does this show progress? Does this show regression? Well, it has to be contextualized in terms of what's going on. The other thing I tell my schools is, look, don't drown in the data. We sit down, particularly those initial early meetings, and I apologize for the coughing. My allergies have run amok here. Everything is in bloom. I can hear the grass growing as we sit here right now. Don't drown in the data, meaning start with questions, look for the simplest way to answer that question, tie it to an outcome or an action item, and get to work. The other thing we've got to do is assess the integrity of the data. And if people say, no, this isn't accurate, it's inconsistent, I don't turn this in, then we need to come up with a plan to correct that. Another thing about looking at the data is keep the conversation focused on things that are in your control. Yes, the parents should be more involved. Yes, wouldn't it be wonderful if this kid came from a home or a neighborhood that was safe and supportive? I can't change any of those things. No one on this webinar can change those things. Focus on what we can do within the school day. And then I tell my team, always create a draft, particularly before you sit down with the larger school faculty. Here's what we're thinking. Here's why we prioritized. Here are the next steps. Give us feedback. We match the practices to data, right? The other piece, again, don't limit it to what you currently know. So in other words, well, we don't have this person, so we can't have that goal. Well, sure you can. Draft that goal. If you know you've got lots of kids and you're building the continuum and you've got a veteran school and they're looking at mental health issues and you say, well, we don't have any mental health folks at this point, don't limit yourself. Build that in, and then, as I said, work with your LEAs, work with your states to figure out how we get that resource. Then we align the resources to implement the practices. So the point of action planning is to always take our local school data, align our resources to address the deficits or barriers, and then continue to revisit that, as I said, minimally on an annual basis, ideally quarterly, hopefully every time we meet as a school team. So what does that look like? Here's what we do with our schools. One of the first things we have them do is a resource map. In other words, what are you doing now? What's in place? What do those services and supports, who do they serve? What's the ticket in? How are we monitoring? We always start with data, right? So one of the first things we have our schools do is the self-assessment survey. And once again, all of these are available, pbis.org, paper pencil, or pbisapps.org electronically. Given that you're school climate transformation grant recipients, we also include some school climate surveys. And then finally, take a look at all of our data, our achievement data, our discipline data, and any other kind of data that we collect on a fairly ongoing basis. So that's what we do at the school level. For those of you, again, who have lead roles in LEAs and states, we also have other tools to measure the fidelity of how well schools are implementing their action plan. There's the school-wide evaluation tool and the benchmarks of quality. Both of those primarily look at universals in Tier 1. The latest tool we've developed that, again, you can access on pbis.org is that tiered fidelity inventory, and that looks at universal, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Remember, we just offer these up as things that are available to help you. At the end of the day, you decide which data and which data sources that you use. So in terms of resource mapping, we'll oftentimes give teams just this figure and say, okay, right now, write down what you're doing at the universal. Do you have a set of social skills? Are you using some of the character education materials, for example? Are you using some kind of packaged discipline program across all of your classes within your school? And then the same logic for Tier 2 and Tier 3. And so that's one of the first things we want to know. What do we have in place now? What's working? What's not working? As I said, what are the decision rules, particularly that Tier 2, Tier 3? How do we get kids to access, and how do we make sure, for example, we got our school counselor who's running a social skill group focusing on making friends, but our data show that what we really need is some conflict resolution and some anger management. So how do we change that resource? How do we make sure that practice lines up with our data? So again, here's kind of just a sample of what a school may put in place as they continue to build that continuum. Here's another example from middle school. I thought they did a nice job showing what each of the levels kind of focus on, what the team name, who's on that team, and how often they meet. And this was just an FYI that they put out to their entire staff. So people were able to kind of understand. People got lost about, well, who does what and where do I go if I've got concerns and so forth. So this is a good example of how they took their action plan they built for the full continuum and just sort of mapped it onto this kind of visual representation. Other things to think about as we go through the data, and here's our challenge. We've got an hour with you, and we usually do this across multiple days with our school team, and so we are flying at 30,000 feet and moving very, very quickly. What will sort of prompt you to keep thinking about is keep going back to the website, work with your partner from the PBIS Center. They will absolutely help you kind of go through this step by step. So we have schools do the resource mapping. We have them take a look at the self-assessment survey, and I'm going to show you what that looks like in a minute here. We have them look at last year's academic data, attendance data, office discipline referral data, in-school suspension data, and so forth. We put all that in front of our teams, and we start taking a look at what's working, what's not working, right? And the first thing we want to do is keep effective strategies in place. But a couple things to think about is, one, make sure you come up with an operational definition of that practice. Why? I guarantee somewhere in your school somebody is running a quote-unquote social skills group. Okay, what does that mean? What social skills do they work on? Who's in there? Are they acting out externalizing kids, or are they more internalizing withdrawn kids? It's real important that you sort of define what the practice is, what's the sort of focus point or outcome of the practice, and what students are kind of appropriate and would benefit from that practice. Again, clear, measurable outcomes. We do some simple task analysis on the steps to implement and how often we're going to revisit this and what data we're going to use to know it's working. That's the first step, right? We always build on strengths. Second, we got to figure out a plan to develop missing components. And you notice it's the exact same set of items that we would look at to help build in that action plan around those missing pieces. Well, how do we come up with those missing pieces? That's, again, where we go back to some of those tools. And the first one that I talked about was the school assessment survey. Hopefully you're familiar with it. If not, I'd encourage you to take a look. Several of our states have made variations on this. They've put unique items, which again is great. This tool is not a research tool. This tool doesn't compute a score. This tool is really designed for school teams to honestly sort of sit down and assess what's in place and get some consensus about what's the priority. So we've got sort of 4 areas that we look at: school-wide, non-classroom, classroom, and then what we do for those sort of kids who need Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports. In addition, I mean, everybody always wants to know, how do you get buy-in? How do you get buy-in? And one of the ways we focus on that is do this. Because what you'll see from the outcome is 80% of the school says this is a priority and we should work on it. Well, if you've got 80% of your colleagues saying this is a priority and yes, I agree, we work on this, it's real simple to get buy-in when your action plan reflects those priorities. So when do we do this? We try to do it annually. Again, you pick the time. A lot of schools will do it in the spring, so as we reflect back on the school year, how it went. If you are working with brand new school teams, we're going to do it as an initial activity. We've got to get that data to figure out and build the map where we're going, right? Who? Everybody in the building should complete the school assessment survey. We oftentimes will do this during a school faculty meeting, and the ticket out is a completed survey. That significantly increases your return rate. I know that's one of the things that all of our schools struggle with, is getting some of their colleagues to comply and either fill out the paper and or go online and complete that survey. But it's really important that you get the majority of folks in your building, because as I said, you want them to have a voice in this action planning process. What happens then is you get several scores or several items within the report. So overall, you'll look at what's in place, what's partially in place, and what's not in place, as well as what's a priority, what's not a priority, okay? So if you do it online, it produces some nice charts and graphs for you. So what you see there is just some made-up data for a particular school, and it shows you the percent of response, right, as well as the overall priority for improvement relative to school-wide implementation. The other piece this will do, as I said, again, it informs kind of those decisions. It gets consensus. It allows you to prioritize, and particularly looking at across the subscales. So, for example, here's once again our school-wide expectations defined. Have they been taught? Do we have a reward system in place? And so forth. So what this shows you here for this particular school is they're doing pretty well. The majority of people in this building think and view that the school-wide systems are in place. So that would be, in terms of action planning, one, something to celebrate. Two, making sure we don't simply say, okay, we've got it in place, let's check that box, take that off our action plan. We always want to see that item to maintain and continue to sustain anything we implement to criteria. What we're looking for here roughly is about 80%. We want to see about 80% or better. That's a pretty healthy implementation average, and we know when schools hit that, they're going to produce some good outcomes for kids, right? You can also sort of dig deeper in terms of the actual responses. So what the report will do for you online is it color codes responses. So anything 80% above is white, 50 to 79 is yellow, and below 49% is red, meaning less than half of your colleagues view that we have this in place. So those yellow and red should really be those targets that you put within your action plan. So here's an example that you see on the screen. So this particular school's got a small number. They're teaching it directly. We've got some inconsistencies around our reward system as well as how we address problem behavior. But then if you jump down to number 15 in red, in terms of looking at a budget, most people view we don't have that. The good news is people think it's a relatively medium to high priority, and a third just say no, it's not an issue. So the school team takes this data, decides, is this critical enough? Are these data compelling enough for us to make this a priority in our action plan? My advice to this particular school would be probably not, right? 50% say it's partially in place. Overall, people aren't saying this is a high priority. I would say this should be something that we task the group to kind of take a look at. Can we figure out ways to maybe go to some of our partners in education and just keep checking in with faculty, and particularly those who viewed it as a concern. The yellow, again, are absolutely potentially priorities for the action plan. So looking at this, what I see and what we probably would recommend to this particular team is to look at how we respond to challenging and problem behaviors, how we look at sort of classroom versus office management. That's what these data are saying to us. So we would absolutely encourage this team to build in an action item to clarify, to delineate, to define, and kind of address how we respond to problem challenging behavior. Okay, what about the mountain of data schools sit on? We file reports, we send them to the central office sends them to the state puts together big reports, but we rarely look at those and drill down. And these data as well can tell us an amazing amount about what's going on in our school. So one of the things, as I said, we always start with is the school assessment survey. The second thing we ask them is, show me your data. Show me the data that you collected over last year. And unfortunately, what a lot of schools will do is say, great, I'll send a work request to our IT person, and maybe in a couple weeks we'll get some printouts. Ideally, we build systems, and the good news is a lot of the systems schools are buying now allow you to query, allow you to pull data out, allow you to ask questions. So we want to know, we want to take a look at those behavioral infractions. We want to look at those office referrals. We want to know when they're happening. We want to know where they're happening. We want to know why kids are getting sent to the office. Are kids getting sent to the office because they don't have their pencil? Are kids getting sent to the office because they're pushing and shoving teachers? I mean, those two pieces of information are critical as we think about action planning. Only knowing the intensity, the type, the whens, the wheres, can we start action planning to address that, okay? So what I've done, and I will include this tool for you as well when we post this on pbis.org, is I developed a one-page form to help schools think about getting through all the data. Because the other thing that happens is when schools do pull all that together, as I said, one of the things that oftentimes happen is they drown in it. It's too much. They don't even know where to begin. They don't know how to make sense of it. And so the form basically helps and walks schools through to kind of prioritize and use the data to help answer their questions as opposed to, well, let's just produce this sort of massive report and outcome of what happened. So we always start with, what do you want to know? And some of the things that I want to know when I work with the school, can I predict problems, successes? When, where, who? What's the possible function of the problem behavior? Are kids doing this to escape and avoid tasks? Are they doing it to get lots of attention? How many kids in our school will potentially require that more targeted or intensive supports? And then what do we need to put in the environment to help promote that change? So what you have on the screen there is the form, and this is I'll put a blank one up, and I'll put this sample, right? So we always start with a question, and this particular school says, does our PBIS intervention focusing on universal decrease problem behaviors? That's what they want to know, because in their action plan they've got an item where we want to decrease overall numbers of office referrals. Next, we look at the data. Hopefully, we use current data that's already in place. We may have to add some additional pieces to help answer that question. But then at the bottom there are a couple key pieces that you really need to tune into. One is, do I have confidence in the accuracy? And I truly love working with school teams because, you know, once they kind of get to know you, they get to be brutally honest. And I'll ask them, it's like, okay, well, you guys had very, very few office referrals last year. Is this accurate? And they'll say, no. It's like, well, why aren't people turning in the form? Oh, because nothing happens. Or I don't like, you know, wasting time doing that. Or it doesn't, you know, kind of capture what happened. Those are things as a team we need to carefully listen to. And as we're thinking about action planning, if everybody says, no, we're inconsistent, we're inaccurate, it's not tapping the information we need to answer the question, then that's an action item. We need to revisit how we capture and collect, store the data we gather on a daily basis. So in this particular example, they're going to take a look at their office discipline referral form. They're also going to look at their team notes. This was a middle school, and the team itself collected a lot of anecdotal. And what they found is that we're going to have to do a lot more specificity on the forms. And then down at the bottom are little notes, right, that can help lead to an action plan. I don't have the who and when. That will definitely be on your action plan, but this is set up to kind of say, okay, what's the next step here? We then figure out what's the simplest way to get it. So we got agreement on the definitions, we create standard forms, how often we collect this, and ideally you use data for multiple purposes. So when we work with our schools on that discipline form, we make sure we capture a lot of things in simple, easy to mark checkboxes that will not only let us know what's going on now, but also will inform us about what the teachers tried, what they think is going on in terms of the function, what time of day, what activities. All those things will then help us, if kids are not responding to universals, to build those Tier 2, Tier 3 systems. So the simplest way, again, the ODR, they got both majors and minors. One of the things they found is they weren't capturing kind of that minor stuff the classroom teachers were dealing with. And then once again, some notes. We've got to introduce this. We've got to teach our colleagues, and so forth. We put the system in place. We add components over time. Ideally, we got a central entry point. Ideally, it's electronic that allows you to query and get that back. So going back again to the worksheet example, you see some of the excuse me, some of the things that they're going to focus on. So all staff send it. The secretary at the end of the day will enter it, and that'll allow us to get the information out. So then what do we do with it? How do we make sense of the data in terms of our action planning? I always tell folks, don't look at absolute, look at trends over time. Is it improving? Is it going in the right direction? It will also help us identify what we need to put in place in terms of instruction or environmental supports. And then, yes, do some comparisons. So you can go to PBIS.org or Swiss, and you can see nationally what % of kids in elementary, middle, and high school get no office referrals, how many of them get 2 to 5, and how many of them get 6 or more, right? So that'll give you a sense of, are we in line with a typical elementary school or a typical high school? But the key really is, again, looking at that relative growth over time. So there's our final slide, or excuse me, final box on the form. We're going to graph this. We're going to share it at monthly staff meetings, and these are the key things we're going to use to analyze and help us answer that question. So from an action planning standpoint, we're going to use this tool. The action plan items might be revisit our office discipline referral system as well as data collection and reporting. That's the item. And then here on this form are the sort of, if you will, the next steps in the critical information. Now, LEAs and SEAs, part of your task is to see, okay, school's got an action plan, school's implementing. Are they implementing it correctly? Are they implementing with Fidelity? So one of the things that I would really encourage you to access is our new tiered Fidelity inventory. And I would encourage you to use this unless you're already using SET or the BOQ. And even if you are, we've got equivalency scores, because this allows you to take a look at the entire continuum. It's designed to be a combination where the school team kind of reports out as well as that external coach or that external person weighs in as well. And I know Rob Horner, hopefully many of you were on the evaluation webinar last month, kind of went through this in much more detail. And again, you can download that webinar on the PBIS.org site. So the scoring in each item, this just gives you kind of an example. So we define it, what's the data source, and then the scoring, right? Again, this is implementation fidelity. So the action plan says we're going to implement universals, we're going to come up with a matrix, social skill lessons, a teaching strategy, schedule, a way to respond to problem behaviors. What this allows our districts and states to come in then is to say, okay, are you implementing evidence-based practices, and are you implementing fidelity? It also then produces sort of outcome scores that LEAs and SEAs can use as part of your action plan. So hopefully what all of you have in your action plan is checking our school implementers for fidelity, and then based on the outcomes of their scores, using that to shape and guide what we do in terms of professional development and technical assistance. So I don't know if Des Moines' on, but we're working with Des Moines Public Schools, and that's one of the first things they did. They did sets because schools were used to those. They did one on all their schools, looked across to find, wow, schools are doing really well here, let's reinforce them. Oh, across the board, schools are struggling with the teaching pieces, or schools are struggling with responding to problem behavior. So therefore, we're going to use that in our own action planning in terms of what we're going to do when we pull those schools together or when we send out some of our coaches. Okay? So again, you can kind of just keep disaggregating the data, and it helps you sort of drill down and build in those action plan items based on how well schools are implementing, even to the point of an actual item analysis, right? What the score was, and so forth. And in the TIFI, as I call it, the Tiered Fidelity Inventory, there's also sort of a brief action planning item. This is a great also sort of form supplement thinking about from an LEA level, SEAs, same logic, taking a look at from the district level, or if you're not working with district school level, and looking at and seeing what their priorities are, and then we shape and design that PD and TA based on that. All right. Oops, sorry about that. So back to kind of the action planning and some critical steps. Remember I said at the outset, there should be some clear goals as well as kind of task analysis. Timelines are important because otherwise we say, oh, we'll get to it when we get to it. And everybody, I guarantee, on this webinar this morning has more things that exceed the minutes in your day. So it's important to create timelines. And timelines also help you prioritize. What do we need to do first? Well, we need to clean up our data system if we agree that it's a mess, because we can't really go beyond that, and we can't really do some good action planning until we have the data in front of us and we know what's going on. Making sure we always communicate this with our colleagues, always put somebody's name. I know the natural response is whoever's not at the meeting, we always write their name down and task them, and everybody knows don't ever be late or don't miss a meeting because then you'll get task assignments. You know, I would encourage you to do a combination. Hopefully those folks who are actually at the table, and then if somebody is appropriate for that, you do assign them, but somebody follows up and lets them know, right? So here's an example. And you can find this information within our workbooks, and our workbooks are online. If you go to pbismissouri.org, once again, I'll post these examples, and I'm in the process of gathering other examples from other schools, districts, and states, and I will make sure those are all available under this webinar header, okay? So here's the blank, right? Not real high tech. We put it in Word. We encourage people to designate your note taker and actually typing it in as we speak. Another thing we do is we'll have this up on the smartboard or projector so everyone can see it. So while we're creating the plan, it's there. When the meeting ends, we hit save, we attach it to an email, and we email it to everybody. So before you get back to your classroom or office, you have that in your inbox. So you see the critical pieces, goals, steps and timelines, who's responsible, how we're going to measure, and then as we do some evaluation, and in this case, this is basically just sort of semester 1, semester 2, so it's kind of at least twice a year, which is, again, the minimum that we encourage teams to revisit their action plan. They're going to do some self-assessment on how we're making progress. So, and again, this is unique to Missouri. They start with, and this follows the implementer's blueprint and lots of other materials that you can find on pbis.org. We start with that common philosophy and purpose. And so you see the goal. You see the steps in terms of how we're going to put that in place, who's responsible. The team leads, everybody participates. The next one, our database manager and communication manager are going to take leads on that, and so forth. So you can kind of get a sense, right? So up there in the top corner, that's the data that we pull from the self-assessment survey that our schools complete. And as you see, in this case, it's no, no, no. And so how do we translate that into an actual action plan item? So that's our goal, but then we drill down and, again, create real concrete steps. When we ask them about is it in place, partially in place, and so forth, once again, we've got lots of no's. And so you see this particular school drafted a common philosophy and purpose because that was one of our action items. And this is the outcome, if you will, of that particular step. And then sort of continuing on, looking at the district school mission. Number 2, is that in place? No. Okay, well, we need to create some action steps to do that as well. And as you see, progressively, We continue to look through that information and then address it specifically within our action plan. Okay? All right. So I've gone through lots of information very, very quickly. Remember, all of this will be at pbis.org. In particular, you can look at and click on the School Climate Transformation Grant link, and that will take you right to these webinars. Just a couple other final things before I open it up for some more questions and any other things that maybe I've missed or you want us to address. We really encourage you, and I believe all of our grant recipients are required to attend our forum in the fall. Great opportunity to bring your school team. We set it up just like I went through. In other words, you bring your action plan. What are your priorities from your action plan? You sit down with your school team or your district team or your state team, and you match sessions to our plans, and off you go. We build in lots of working time so that when a couple of your team folks have gone to that session, you immediately come back and say, hey, here's the big ideas I learned. Here are some things we absolutely need to make sure we embed in our action plans to keep us moving forward. The next PBIS webinar for our School Climate Transformation Grant schools will be about training and coaching capacity. Susan Barrett and Lucille Eber will be hosting that event. Again, mark your calendars, May 28th. That will be the last one for the school year. We continue to talk about and look at topics, and just like we have discussed here this morning, we look at data. So our School Climate Transformation Grant recipients, you've done an amazing job in returning those surveys to Jen Freeman. Jen Freeman pulls those together into reports. We take a look at those data, and these webinars are a direct reflection of where you all indicated you need additional information and or you're struggling. Okay? So as I said, I wanted to leave some time for additional questions. So you've got the little box, type it in. Again, folks have been doing that, and Barb has been answering them as they pop up, but we'll give this chance for any additional questions that we can maybe discuss a little bit more. Or Barb, are there key questions that we need to add in the conversation? See, this is the downside of a webinar. I'm sitting in my office talking to my computer. I'm hoping that you're all out there, and I'm hoping that you're engaged and the information has been helpful. It's a little disconcerting. Any questions? Now's your chance. Okay. As always, we are here to assist you. Oh, nope, we've got a question popped up. Oh, someone asked to talk a little bit more about the district capacity assessment. That's a tool that was developed by Dean Fixon and Karen Blase. They have a center on scaling up evidence-based interventions. So they've developed a tool for district leadership teams to sit down and do a self-assessment. So one of the struggles from the very beginning is a lot of our districts don't have a district leadership team. So that's the first thing we need to make sure we put in place. If we don't have a district leadership team, then I would use perhaps, I know principals get together on a fairly regular basis. That would be maybe an opportunity to go through that and or identify, one or two or three key people within the district who could respond to that. One of the things we actually have had our schools do is to complete that from their perception on how well the district is set up to provide the supports. And we'll sort of share that information with district leadership to kind of look for some disconnects. So we may think it's in place, but if our schools aren't seeing that or are aware of, then that's a real issue. In that district capacity assessment, it's somewhat generic. It focuses on essential features. What I would encourage you to do is to complete it thinking about our school climate transformation efforts. So complete it specific to PBIS, school climate. You can also complete it thinking about our academic supports. So there's a multiple ways and kind of lenses you can look through that. But it's really designed to identify where are gaps in terms of professional professional development. Where are gaps in technical assistance? Where are the disconnects between what we think we're offering and what the schools are saying they need? In addition, it also helps you think about, first of all, do we have an action plan at the district level? Well, you all have to have district improvement plans that you file with your state, but those are oftentimes very, very broad and oftentimes are sort of forced choices based on what the priorities are in that state. So going through that process, if nothing else, will set the occasion for lots of good conversation. And I think it will really help you by looking at school data, i.e. through the tiered fidelity inventory or the SET, as well as thinking about what else do we need at the district level. One other kind of related note to that, we here at Missouri are developing kind of what we're sort of calling the sort of starter package for districts to get going. So I've tasked my folks in the center here to start pulling together information, kind of outlining sort of those step 1, step 2, step 3, similar to what I've done here very, very quickly in a short amount of time. And as soon as that's together, we'll make sure that's available as well. In fact, we'll make sure we email the link directly to all of our grant recipients. Another question came up about score equivalence for the TFI. So we've been doing this for 10 years, and we've got schools with SET scores and BOQ scores. We want to move to the TFI. What I would do is, again, go to PBIS.org, click on evaluation. That will take you to the TFI instrument. There should be information there. If not, then email Kent McIntosh or Rob Horner. I know they've developed them. I'm fairly certain they're there. If not, I will also follow up with Kent and Rob and make sure that they post those. Looks like we've got another question. Does the DC, I don't understand the question.
Have to be modeled by a TA person.
Oh, there was another question about the DCA and how you get access to that. I believe Rob has some information on the evaluation webinar. If you want to do the electronic version, you have to log on to that SISIP website and you go through a brief online webinar that kind of walks you through how to do it, kind of alerts you to some of the key pieces, things to think about, and then once you do that, you then have access. So what I would encourage you to do is to take a look at that, go to the website. If you can't locate it, reach out to your PBIS partner. They can also help you link up to that and make sure you're going in the right direction.
Tipping instead of SAS. Should we do that?
Great. Another question about, do we do tiered fidelity versus the school assessment survey? Tiered fidelity is designed for our districts and states. It's designed to look at implementation fidelity. Absolutely. We're going to use those results and help schools shape and refine their action plan, as well as using that information to help us as a district or state create action plans. The SAS is not a research tool. That's really designed to be a self-assessment. And we have our schools complete that every year. Even our veteran schools that have been at it for 15 years, they're rocking and rolling on our fidelity measures. We still have them do it annually because we have new issues, we have new staff, we have new students, and it's always a great idea to get input from your colleagues. People always worry about buy-in. If people don't feel they have a say, they're less likely to participate. But if you ask me to weigh in, and then during a faculty meeting you show the outcomes and you say 80% of us, 70% of us say this is a priority and we need this, therefore the PBS team, our school climate team, is going to start working on that. It's real hard for people to push back then. and it increases the likelihood that staff will engage. So we use the school assessment survey as a pure planning tool. I tend to discourage states and districts from using it as a implementation check or as a part of a recognition system, because then it's too tempting to maybe give ourselves a little bit higher score than we actually want. We want brutal honesty on that. We want teachers to say, no, I don't see this happening, and yeah, this is something we should be doing. Whereas the SET and the BOQ and the TFI are really designed for kind of external of the school to check overall how well they're doing, and then to shape sort of PDTA agendas as well as feed that information back into that school's action plan. Any other questions popping up?
Schedule of upcoming webinars.
Schedule upcoming webinars. As I said, hopefully you've got there on your screen, May 28th, 8 a.m. Pacific, 9 Mountain, 10 Central, 11 Eastern, and that will be training and coaching capacity. Susan Barrett, Lucie Lieber. If there, excuse me, if there are specific topics that you would like us to speak about, again, get in touch with your PBIS center partner, share that information with them, and or send it directly to Jen Freeman. I know many of you get frequent emails from Jen asking for information. So either avenue will get to us, and we will add it to our agenda as we shape the next school year's series of webinars. How soon will the PowerPoint be posted? I will email it to our web person today. It usually takes him a couple days. So check back later this week, if not Monday for sure. Okay, I have 11 o'clock. We've come in under time. Again, I apologize for the little hiccup there in the technology. Thanks for those who brought it to our immediate attention. As I said, I'm sitting here in an office staring at my screen, and my screen was working just beautifully. So again, I really appreciate everybody's time and attention. Follow up with questions. You can email me directly, or Barb. Our information's on the website, or you can reach out to your center partner. If you don't have a grant, again, reach out to us directly. There's also an option at pbis.org to ask questions and queries. So thank you all very, very much, and have a great rest of your day.